Evan Green, and this is my passion project. What can my passion project do for you? To convince you why this passion project matters to you, I'll explain what drove me to choose it in the first place. I wanted a project I could fully appreciate working on for a semester, so choosing the topic was the most important part for me. I went through 122 previous passion projects and developed 3 criteria. It had to solve a problem, be of importance, and be actionable. However, it quickly seemed like the latter conditions were mutually exclusive. So that led me to get advice from my friends. The most impactful advice I received was, what subject do I wish I had more time to pursue? This planted an idea that maybe I could effectively choose all of my interests. Self-improvement was broad enough in scope for this project and also met my 3 criteria. So, what this project means for you is that I hope whatever you learn from what I cover here today, you can use to pursue your own interests. My first point is cliche, but it is fundamentally the most important point I make. You have to have an intrinsic reason to change. External pressures won't always be there to motivate us. A great example of this is New Year's Eve. If you set a certain resolution because societal pressures encourage you to do so, that is a surefire way to fail. However, it's not always so easy to tell if your motivation is intrinsic or extrinsic. So I'll discuss this with home cooking. Someone cooks for the sake of someone else, that's clearly extrinsic motivation. If someone cooks for better health, I'd argue that's a mix of both intrinsic and extrinsic. If someone cooks because they enjoy cooking, that's intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is taking action for the process, the doing, whereas extrinsic motivation is taking action for the reward. That segues us to our next topic, which is experience. Experience is imperative to building new skills. You've probably heard of the 10,000-hour rule, or at least had it referenced to you, which was made by the Swedish psychologist Ericsson and popularized in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. 10,000 hours is the proposed amount of hours it takes for mastery in a subject. However, this rule is disputed, as it should be. 10,000 hours is an incomprehensibly long time to devote oneself to something, and it's more symbolic than a hard rule. The point is that if you truly commit yourself to something and work on it long enough, you'll achieve mastery. To put into scale how long 10,000 hours is, if you're a freshman here, you have roughly 10,920 hours of school from kindergarten to now. By the end of the school year, you'll have roughly 280 more. The only way to get such a vast amount of experience is through habits. Habits are crucial because they make actions automatic. I'll explain how to establish a habit using research from both Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit and Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. They state that you need a cue, routine, or action, and then a reward. First, you need to know what process you'd like to make into a habit. If you wanted to become a musician, it's one thing to listen to music, it's another to write music, and it's an entirely different matter to actually play the music. It's important to have a practical and effective habit. As James Clear puts this, motion is the process of preparing, whereas action is work that actually produces a result. Now that you have a set process, you need a conditioned stimulus. Let's say I want to make 6 stools every day at 2 p.m. On the first 2 days, I follow through, but on the 3rd day, I'm at a deli and I don't have my chair making kit with me. There are more occurrences where at 2 p.m. I don't make stools, and this leads to stimulus extinction. I no longer associate 2 p.m. with making stools. This is a problem because with habits, you are building trust that every time a stimulus happens, you take a course of action. By not taking that course of action, you take a meaning away from the stimulus. Charles Duhigg says there are 5 main types of cues: location, time, emotional state, other people. And finally, the preceding action. Although not all of these cues are made equal. I pointed out the flaws of having a time-based cue, for example. Emotional state and other people aren't very replicable, making them poor cues. The most desirable cues, I would argue, is the location and having a preceding action just because they're relatively replicable. For example, having a cue being getting home from school, which would be the preceding action, is a reliable constant. The final part of a habit is the reward. It's just like the stimulus, it's important to have a consistent reward so you have faith in your process. Going back to the early example, the person who cooks because they enjoy cooking will always be satisfied because the reward is the action. They will be more likely to repeat their habit and stick to it than the person who cooks for another because external pressures don't always reciprocate your efforts. Finally, I'll discuss some common questions, and our first being, how long does it take a habit to form? This is a common question, and it's understandable to see why. The research on this varies, some citing 3 weeks to others an entire season. This is kind of similar to the 10,000-hour rule. It depends on the complexity of the habit, and it's more about doing it until it becomes automatic, which is to say habitual, in an exact amount of days. What happens if you fail? At this point, I hope you've considered, at least partially, what you want to be better at. Think of someone who is the pinnacle of that. Now ask yourself, do you think they fail in their habits? Do you think they deviate? Assuredly so. The best in the world aren't infallible, they just have the most experience. What this means is that when they fall, they're the most likely to get up. So, what does this mean for you? Charles Duhigg suggests changing your habits, whether the cue, the reward, or the actual process itself. So, let's say, instead of making 6 stools at 2 every day, I make more or less, I make armchairs instead, etc. I could change the cue to be every time I walk into the kitchen, I make a stool. Or perhaps I even change the reward, listening to music as I make stools to make it more intrinsically motivating, or dancing every time I finish one. That concludes my passion project. I hope you're able to utilize something from this to personally impact you. I'd like to give a special shout out to a few special people. Charles Duhigg, which my research is largely based on, and an interview that greatly enhanced my project, Mr. Oster for being a phenomenal teacher, who's greatly appreciated in this opportunity to do this, and my mom for having tolerance and her resources made this final project what it is. Thank you.